All right, welcome back to the Ryan Morrison Show. On this special edition, we are at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm super, super blessed and thankful to have Brad Feld here, just an iconic individual, one of the co-founders of Techstars. You just wrote a new book called Give First, The Power of Mentorship, and I would love to just let you take the show for just a second and tell everybody who you are, and then we'll dive into a little bit about your book.
Sure. I am a person you met yesterday at High Alpha when I talked about the book some with an audience that was an awesome audience. High Alpha is, one of the venture funds and the studio business here in Indy that's really invented that category. The venture fund I'm part of, Foundry Group, is an investor in High Alpha, so that's how I knew that connection. So that's how we got to meet each other. I've been many things over what's now a almost 60-year life. I started off as a founder. So I started a company when I was in college, grew that company for about 7 years, sold it to a public company. I became the chief technology officer of that public company, and that's where I learned how to do deals. That company bought a bunch of companies, and I was a part of the deal team on the technical side of it. But again, got this opportunity of working with two really amazing people, Len Fassler and Jerry Pock, who basically took a guy that was in his late 20s that really knew nothing about any sort of transactional stuff. And knew how to, write software, run a company, but that was it. And really helped me understand it from a different lens. Along the way, I made a bunch of investments with my own money as an angel investor. I accidentally became a venture capital investor working for a group that I was affiliated with that then we ended up starting a fund that was linked to SoftBank. That fund raised a lot of capital, did a lot of investments in the internet bubble, had a lot of success. And then at the tail end of the internet bubble, when everything fell apart, had a lot of pain and crashed pretty hard. I went on to start a new venture fund, Foundry, in 2007. I co-founded Techstars in 2006. My wife, Amy Batchelor, and I have a foundation called the Anchor Point Foundation that we run together. This is my 9th book, so I've been writing books for a long time. I'm a long-distance runner, and I like to say there are 4 things today as I approach 60 that I love to do. You heard this yesterday, so I'll just say it again because I'm enjoying saying it. I love 4 things. Love reading, writing, running, and spending time with Amy. Everything else, there's plenty of things I really like to do, but those are really the 4 things that as I've sort of navigated my way through this time on this planet that I really love.
That's awesome and perfectly succinct. Awesome career so far, and you have so much more, I know, to give, which is a great segue into the book that you wrote. So from my understanding, there was a blog post that you wrote in 2013 about giving first. And so I'm curious about how your philosophy of giving first, the different opportunities and moments that you've experienced in your career, and then through Techstars and all of the different mentorship and companies that you've seen across the globe, starting through this philosophy, how it's evolved over time into what you were able to produce with your book.
Yeah, so let me define it for anybody that's listening. For me, the phrase give first means that you're willing to put energy into something without knowing what you're going to get back. It's not altruistic. You do expect to get something back, but you don't know from whom, when, over what time period, and what magnitude, and what consideration. The idea came to me, it was a way I was behaving for a long time, where I was just willing to do stuff without really knowing where things were going to lead to. It came to me in about 2010 as I was working on a book called Startup Communities. And while I was working on that book, I wrote a paragraph that in one of the chapters called Give Before You Get. And the idea of give before you get is essentially, it wasn't as well said as I said the definition of give first, but that was the essence of it. And my assertion was, if you are trying to build a startup community, you want to get everybody that's involved in it putting energy into the startup community, but not defining transactionally what they're going to get out. If you say, I'll put some time in if I get this, that's not productive. I'll only work with you if you sign this contract with me to do this. That's not productive in the context of getting a positive feedback loop going in a system like that. Give before you get is a particularly gnarly hashtag in Twitter. So somebody at Techstars turned it into hashtag give first. And it became Give First from there. When I reflected on it, maybe a couple of years later, after the book had been out, after a lot of stuff around startup communities was out in the world and people were giving me feedback on things and I was learning from it, I realized how fundamental this idea of Give First was to the way that I've behaved, not just in the context of Techstars and current life, but sort of going back a long, long time. And some of it was my willingness to try things that didn't go anywhere. Some of it was my openness to randomness and sort of willingness to just sort of engage with anybody about anything and see where it went. And some of it was that I had a lot of success in things that were indirect from the specific thing that I did. So I'd do something that led to something that led to something that then led to something that ended up being successful versus very deliberately that first thing. And I sort of viewed that as a way of being. When I sat down to write this book, I really wanted to try to put it together in a clear way, a philosophy around this idea of Give First. And I incorporated this notion of mentorship, which has been very, very important to me and is a fundamental part of how Techstars works, into that overall philosophy of what Give First is.
100%. And I think that's something that you talked about yesterday too at the event, which is the 4 tenets or pillars of a startup community.
Yeah,
right? You got to
right.
yeah, startup community from an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Perfect.
Right. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but the 4 things that you need number 1 is you need founders or instigators, right? To be doing entrepreneurial activities.
Yeah. Leaders. The founders and the instigators are the leaders.
Okay. Got it.
But keep going.
Okay. And then, so this is fresh off my mind, but then you also need an entrepreneurial ecosystem whose central focus is to make those founders successful.
Yep.
Right. And I'm going to give you the other 2.
All right. Well, no, but you're off to a good start. So, especially if you encountered it for the first time yesterday, I defined this construct of a startup community, which prior to 2012, when I came out with the book, that phrase didn't exist. People talked about these things called entrepreneurial ecosystems and innovation clusters and stuff like that. They're kind of an academic language and a little bit disconnected. And I really wanted to create this notion of a thing that was focused on founders, and that became the startup community. And simple way to understand it is there's only one reason a startup community exists, and that's to help founders succeed. The entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is bigger than the startup community, it's a superset. It involves all the different actors that are involved in entrepreneurship in a geography, would be like university and government and large companies and companies that help startups and service providers like lawyers and investors. They have other agendas besides that singular mission of helping founders succeed. Now, helping founders succeed is one of their goals, but they have others. University has lots of other goals. So in that, I created this construct. In the context of a startup community, I came up with a thing called the Boulder Thesis, and this is what you're riffing on, there are 4 things that are principles of the Boulder Thesis. The first is that the leaders have to be entrepreneurs. And the instigator language is I realized over time that I'd made a mistake in that first book. I fixed it when I came out with the second edition, which is there's a lot of people who work for those organizations, university, government, large companies, that do play leadership roles in the startup community, but they're not founders. And I didn't want to be exclusionary of them. I wanted them to be part of it. So eventually I started saying founders and instigators had to be the leaders in the startup community. The key there is that it's people, not organizations. People are the leaders, not the organizations. The second is that you have to take a long-term view. And I initially defined it as 20 years. Now I say it's 20 years from today. So Techstars, for example, is 18 years old. It's 18 years into its 38-year journey. You're always looking forward into the future for what you're trying to create. And that's critical, not just with companies, but with any sort of community or activity that you're building, especially a startup community. Next, you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage in the startup community in any way. So this idea that somebody wants to participate, wants to be involved, awesome. You're not creating a magic special private club that is only for certain people. And then the last is that you have to have activities and events in the startup community that engage lots of people in entrepreneurship all the time. So it's not like you have 1 or 2 events a year or 1 event a month. I kind of knew in Boulder that there was lots of things that were rocking and rolling when I couldn't go to every one of the events because there was more than one in an evening. And that's when you really know that things are happening. So those were the four principles of the Boulder Thesis. And, 14 years later, they're really durable. It's something that I think people could relate to all around the world as part of what I've done with not just Techstars, but startup communities and some of the writing and concepts and other organizations I've been in, like the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is the annual event that the Global Entrepreneurship Network does. I mean, there's what, 3,000 people here from all over the world working on building startup communities wherever they are. It's awesome to see it both develop and evolve, and those principles really hold well.
They do. And I appreciate you for sharing those and also for hosting that event with us and giving us all a book. And I regret not bringing it with me today for you to sign. So hopefully we'll be able to stay in touch and, be able to hopefully do that. But I also wanted to come back to the 18 principles of the manifesto, the mentor manifesto. So my question for you here is, what principle do you find most challenging to uphold consistently?
Yeah, so for anybody listening and they say, oh, he had 4 principles in the Boulder Thesis and 18 principles in Techstars Mentor Manifesto. That sounds like a really structured life. The answer is no. Uh, what I found though, that when I try to put together an idea, I like to have some structure to the idea, and the principles effectively are like the big bullet points in the outline that you can then kind of keep referring back to. David Cohen came out with this thing in 2010 called the Techstars Mentor Manifesto. And we started Techstars in 2006. And where the Techstars Manifesto came from was a couple of years of experiencing running the Techstars Accelerator. Back when nobody really knew how to run an accelerator or what an accelerator was, we had created this concept called a mentorship-driven accelerator. We surround all the founders with mentors. And we didn't really know, though, what good mentorship was or what effective tenets of mentorship were. So as we did that, over time, the first year we had no idea what made for a good mentor or good mentorship activity, but we learned a bunch. Second year, and we screwed up a lot of stuff. Second year, we learned, and we started to have a little bit of a point of view about it. By the third year, I think David had started to really get a view of what made an effective mentor. And then one day in the fourth year, he wrote a blog post that was the Techstars Mentor Manifesto. Just very quickly pushed out, here are a bunch of bullet points. I think the hardest in general, not the hardest for me necessarily, but the hardest in general, is this notion that when you're being a mentor to a founder, you are simply providing data. You're not telling the person what to do. You're not saying, oh, I understand your problem. You should do A, B, and C. What you're doing is you're using a process, and one of the principles is a principle called be Socratic, or ask questions. You're trying to elicit the person, the mentee, to work through the problem out loud with you. And the responses that you give are data that incorporate into that process versus directive. You should do this, you should do that. I think that generally is the hardest, because I think a lot of times mentors are very experienced. They have a view of how the world works from their frame of reference. They know what's worked for them. And so, the sort of biblical cliche is you don't want to you don't want to catch fish for somebody. You want to teach somebody how to catch fish. It's kind of the same thing. You're really trying to help the mentee build up their own muscle around problem solving. In addition, a lot of things that a mentor will say is not actually valid, might not be correct, might not apply to the situation. And so when you're giving a mentee directives, when your directives might not be right, versus, hey, this is just data. It's a hypothesis I have about your situation, but I acknowledge that it might not be the right thing. I think that's hard for a lot of people. For me, one of the ones that used to be hard that is no longer difficult is sort of this notion, I like to say, of do or do not, there is no try, right? It's the Yoda the Yoda line with Luke in The New Hope when he's trying to lift the TIE fighter out of the swamp. And for me, I've mostly eliminated the word try from my vocabulary, but I had to consciously do that. So an example is a lot of founders, when they are starting to fundraise, they say, I'm going to go try to raise this fund, or I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to try to do that. And by saying try, all you're really doing is limiting yourself. And you're sort of saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to succeed or not. I'm going to try. Well, you don't know if you're going to succeed or not anyway. But the affirmative statement of I'm going to go raise capital, or I'm going to go make this product happen, or I'm going to go close this sale is very powerful. And the context of mentoring, the principle is decide to mentor or not, right? It's one or the other. Like, it's okay if you decide not to be a mentor to somebody. Don't half-ass it. Don't sort of do it. Don't try to do it. You're either really committed to play that kind of a role, or it's okay to say no to somebody if you just don't have the time or the energy or the interest to engage at that level. And that used to be hard for me. Remember, I'm that guy that likes to engage with everybody. Default yes is a modality for me. Saying no is hard. And I used to joke, I say no 50 times a day as a venture capitalist. And so every now and then I just have to reset my no counter by saying yes to something. So if you happen to be the 51st person I talk to that day, I say yes. I don't like that. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me happy. So like adjusting how I dealt with that so that it didn't drain me of emotional energy was hard. But I figured it out.
Wow. Yeah, there's some really great lessons in there around the mindset of being a mentor and the intention that you're bringing into the conversation. Because, I've been able to mentor some founders and through accelerators that I've built, baby Techstars that I told you. And that's the hardest thing is to hold back on is do this, do that. It's, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And then really making them the fisherman.
I think that's
right?
great. I think that's great. One tool that I've used for a long time is from my experience. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not, this is what you should do. It's, I had this experience. From my experience, this happened and this happened and this happened. And just give the person some data to contemplate.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you another question. This is a Techstars question. We kind of briefly touched on it yesterday. But if you were starting Techstars in 2025 instead of 2006, what would you do differently in its structure, selection process, mentorship model? Is there anything that you've learned now that looking back in hindsight could have been successful or could have led to
Yeah, well, a long
more success?
I have no idea what I said yesterday. I've already forgotten. We'll see if I say anything even remotely close to what you heard yesterday.
Sure.
But yeah, I've learned an enormous amount. I mean, Techstars, like any other company, is just a series of experiments, many of them that failed.
Yeah.
In my mind, the best founders run lots and lots of experiments. When they fail, you learn from the experiment, you do more. You modify your experiment, do another one. When the experiment works, you just do a lot more of that. One of the big things that is a change since David Cohen came back as CEO in the last year, that as he and I were talking about strategy, that is a real shift, is Techstars, as they had gotten very large. This was not true at the beginning. At the beginning, almost everything we did was a function of pull. Somebody was pulling us to do a thing. In fact, we resisted opening an office in a second location and running a program in a second location. The second year, there were a lot of people that came to us and said, wow, this Techstars thing's kind of cool. Will you do Techstars in City X? And we said, we don't even know if Techstars is a good idea. We're just going to do it again in Boulder and try it again and learn from it. We screwed up a lot of stuff the first year. We just want to get better at this and figure it out. In the third year, a guy named Bill Lerner, who was a successful entrepreneur in Boston, and I had been in Boston for a long time, had a big Boston network. That was where Amy and I were for 12 years before we moved to Boulder. He had come to maybe demo day. He'd invested in one of the companies, and he got excited about Boulder. And I remember meeting him in Boulder. We spent time together. He spent some time with David. And at the end of the day, he basically just said to me, you have to do this in Boston. It's like, no, 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 no. You have to do this in Boston. We are doing this in Boston. Like there was no dissuading Bill of the idea that we were doing this in Boston. And so I said, okay, cool. Let's try it. Let's do another city. And Boston is a great city because I know it and I know lots of people. And our biggest concern then was, David's concern, I should say, was, hey, where are we going to fund this? Because I don't know that, I want to fund it with you, me, Jared, and David Brown are going to come up with enough money for the Boston thing. And Bill's like, I want to put money in. I'm like, you know what, give me a weekend. And I called a half dozen friends. And by the end of the weekend, we put the money together for the Boston program, and off it went. Seattle program, which was their next program, was very similar. A founder that I'd worked with multiple times, Andy Sack, it said to me, we have to do this in Seattle. A VC who I knew that was friends with Andy also, Greg Gottesman, very close friend now, said, we have to do this in Seattle. And I said, we're just trying this thing in Boston. We don't know if Seattle's, nope, we're doing it in Seattle. And you know what? We've already put the funding together and it's the following, and we're going to start it. Here's when we want to do. I'm like, okay, let's go. Right, off we go. So pull is the thing I'm describing. Techstars had gotten to a model that I would describe much more as push. We had a team that was called the revenue team, and it was, the sales organization, and they were showing up pushing products. So we had products now, one of which was accelerators, well-known, well-defined, well-understood. But, people would call us and, or we'd engage with somebody and we'd show up and we'd say, this is the thing we have for you. You want to work with Techstars? Here's an accelerator. And we had multiple other products like any good company. So, and they fit for different, scale of the startup community and the different people we're talking to. But it was a set of products that we were trying to push versus the inverse, where somebody would come to us and say, we really want to do something with Techstars. And we say, what do you need? In your geography and your ecosystem and your network and your organization, what do you need? You're like, it's awesome that you're interested in us. We've got a bunch of different things we can do, but what do you need? And we didn't respond to the pull. Now, in the selling process, right, solution selling, you do say, well, Mr. Customer, what do you need? And you do some of that. But the dynamic was then trying to configure what we had to that versus saying, you know what? We just want to make sure that what we're doing, wherever we're doing it, is something that helps founders succeed. That's it. That's our goal. We know what our goal is. And so then anybody that comes to us now, it's much more of a question of, okay, what can we do to be helpful to you? You have a bunch of stuff going on in your startup community. Startup communities are not a new idea. You might even have a couple of accelerators. You have a Grogu accelerator. By the way, I like that better than the baby accelerator. You have a Grogu accelerator where you're, well, you might not even need an accelerator in your geography, but are there other things that Techstars and Techstars Network and the experience that we have and the 4,000 companies and the 10,000 mentors and all the different corporate relationships that we have can be useful to you? And so we really shifted our mindset around that. And I think that's something I wish we had never lost, because the pull, I think, would have taken us in, some different directions and would have caused us to make less mistakes if we'd stayed on that.
Yeah, that's key. It was like that North Star, right? Of going in customer discovery, right? But Techstars is so successful.
Yeah, but I want to adjust it because I personally don't like North Star language. Because North Star kind of feels like it's unchanging. Like it's this thing out there and you're heading towards this thing. And anybody that's ever built a company knows that what you're heading towards, you need a value. What's your mission? But where you're going evolves. And I like with Techstars now, this really strong focus is that the goal, the organization, the entity exists to help founders succeed. Everything that happens from that is a function of us doing that. And then interestingly, if you sort of tie back to this idea of where things are going, the goal is not, have a North Star. The goal is understand your goal and your mission. Understand, sort of contemporary language would be understand your why.
Yes.
And then keep learning and keep figuring things out and keep learning from mistakes and keep evolving where you're going and doing it in a way where your ears are really open to the feedback you're getting. Whether that feedback is delivered really politely and kindly, whether the feedback is really harsh, whether it's not valid from your frame of reference, listen to it. And so as you're doing things that are on that why that you have, the organization that you're building grows and evolves from there.
That's awesome. Let's end there with the notion of principles, right? It's about the journey, it's an evolution, and you just keep growing, you keep iterating, and you can learn more about that and all the principles in your book. Give First, the Power of Community Mentorship, right?
Just the power of mentorship.
Okay, the Power of Mentorship. So Give First, the Power of Mentorship. Thank you, Brad. This has been super, super amazing. I'm super grateful to have a relationship and have you on my show.
My pleasure. I'm glad we could find time for it today in this wonderful booth at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress.
Yep. And shout out to Silver Fox Media for
Silver Fox Media, which set this booth up and has been running podcasts. I think this is the fourth podcast I've done while I'm here. So that's an efficient use of a day.
That's a great use of the day. Thank you, Brad.